Just brief introduction to the senator. After being tortured and imprisoned in Cuba, Senator Cruz's father, Rafael, fled to the United States to attend the University of Texas at Austin in 1957. He then started a small business in the oil and gas industry. Today, Ted's father is a pastor in Dallas. Senator Cruz was first elected to the U.S. Senate in 2012, is now serving his second term. He sits on 5 committees in the Senate, including the Committee on Foreign Relations, as well as the Committee on the Judiciary. Senator, on behalf of everybody here today, we're grateful for your time and grateful to introduce you and welcome you up to the dais.
Well, thank you very much. It's a privilege to join you. Let me say thank you for having me here, and let me say in particular thank you to the wonderful Iranian American community in Texas and all across the country. The Iranian American community is a community that understands the price of freedom. I will say, and you heard briefly in the introduction a bit of my personal family story, but being the son of a Cuban who was imprisoned and tortured and who came to America seeking freedom, that's powerful. And let me say in particular to the folks who are here who fled oppression in Iran, who came to America, let me, if I may, do something unusual, which is let me speak on behalf of your kids. And let me say thank you. Thank you for having the courage to risk everything to seek freedom. You've transformed your children and your grandchildren because you had that courage. And it's one of the real blessings when you are the child of someone who has seen liberty taken, that it makes you appreciate just how precious it is. The government of Iran has been under a shroud of darkness for decades now. The Ayatollah Khamenei and the mullahs enforce brutal repression on the people. And I will say to the Iranian people, to the men and women of Iran, America's with you. America is with you in your struggle against cruel, oppressive, torturing, murderous tyrants. Freedom matters. I believe we can one day again have a free Iran. Not with the Ayatollah in power. And from the United States perspective, in my view, the threat of a nuclear Iran is the single greatest national security threat facing our country. It's why, as I look back over the last 3 years, the biggest national security victory, I believe, of the Trump administration was pulling out of the disastrous Obama-Iranian nuclear deal. The Ayatollah routinely leads chants of death to America. If history teaches anything, it is that if somebody tells you they want to kill you, believe them. And at a very minimum, don't give them $100 billion to carry out that stated intention. The Obama-Iranian nuclear deal was the most profoundly foolhardy foreign policy deal of the modern age. Giving billions of dollars to an Ayatollah who is laughing and proclaiming his intent to wage war with that money. Iran is today, the government of Iran is the #1, the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism. Those dollars under the Obama-Iran nuclear deal went straight to murdering Americans, to murdering American servicemen and women, to murdering innocent civilians, and to murdering our friends and allies. And it is profoundly significant that the Trump administration had the courage to pull out. Within the Trump administration, there was an enormous argument about whether to pull out of the deal or not. At the time, both the State Department and the Defense Department advised against pulling out of the deal. And I engaged vigorously and directly with the President, urging him that the right thing to do was pull out of the deal, and that's in fact what we did. Not only that, after we pulled out of the deal, there remained in place a series of waivers that kept aspects of the Obama-Iran deal in place. Perhaps the most significant of those waivers were the oil waivers. Waivers that allowed the government of Iran to continue selling 1 million barrels a day of oil to fund their regime, to fund terrorists, to fund murder, to fund oppression. Well, earlier this year, we had a big argument within the Trump administration. In this instance, there was a disagreement between agencies. The State Department argued if we ended the oil waivers, the global price of oil would skyrocket. The Energy Department, who one might think would know something about energy, argued no, that was not the case. There was plenty of global production, and ending the Iran oil waivers would not cause the price of oil to skyrocket. Once again, I engaged actively and directly with the President, urging the administration, stop sending billions of dollars to theocratic lunatics who want to kill us. And once again, the administration did the right thing, ended the oil waivers. And it turned out energy was right and state was wrong. Price of oil did not skyrocket. We ended the oil waivers and the world market barely noticed. But I'll tell you who did notice was the government in Tehran, who suddenly the millions of dollars that had been flowing in to fund their brutal regime were shut off. That was the right thing to do. Now, we continue to have debates about what the next steps are, because as the economic pressure is weakening the regime, two things are happening. One, the regime is afraid of its people. And this is a word of encouragement that I want to give the men and women here. Dictatorships can seem very, very strong until suddenly they're not. The Ayatollah and the mullahs are terrified of the people. They're terrified of truth. And as they lose the billions that have been funding their repressive regime, they are more and more vulnerable to the people demanding freedom. But secondly, in the process, we've seen them lashing out. We've seen them carry out acts of war, attacking their neighbor Saudi Arabia, attacking the oil facilities there and doing major damage to their production capability. Unequivocal act of war carried out by Iran, lashing out as the regime is becoming desperate to hold on to power. I believe there are two steps the administration should take now in response to these Iranian violations of law and acts of war. First step we should do is we should end the so-called civilian nuclear waivers. These are the waivers that remain. There were a total of 7 civilian nuclear waivers that allowed additional research, allowed additional nuclear activity in a, quote, civilian setting. One of those waivers allows continued work in the Fordo facility. Fordo is a bunker built into the side of a mountain to develop nuclear weapons. We have right now a waiver in place saying, oh, that's fine, we trust you, you're going to be just fine going on in Fordo. That is ridiculous, and the administration ended several of those waivers. After I publicly called for it and made the case, they need to end the rest of them. They need to end all of the Iranian civil nuclear waivers. But secondly, there is a remedy, and an even more powerful remedy, that the President and the administration have at their hands. It was actually under the terms of the Obama-Iran nuclear deal. If Iran violates the deal, any of the original signatories can invoke what are called snapback sanctions. Now, Iran is openly violating the deal. They are flouting the deal and they are flaunting it on the global stage, brazenly in violation, which means the administration has the authority to go into the UN Security Council, invoke the snapback sanctions, and what that will result is not just the U.S. having sanctions, but the world's remaining sanctions snapping back immediately, so that maximum pressure, in fact, means maximum pressure. I think invoking the snapback sanctions is the next step. It is the critical step to cutting off the resources from the Ayatollah. A final word of encouragement. I mentioned that tyrannies and dictatorships appear much stronger than they in fact are. In my office here in the Senate, the dominant feature you'll see if you come there is a gigantic painting of Ronald Reagan standing before the Brandenburg Gate. And above him in the painting are the words, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. I think those are the most consequential words uttered by any leader in modern times. Many of you may not know the backstory behind that speech. So the backstory is that speech, 3 times the State Department edited those words out of the speech. And 3 times Reagan, with his own hand, wrote them back into the speech. And the State Department argued to him, said, Mr. President, you can't say this. This is too provocative. This is too belligerent. And here was their kicker, their most powerful argument. This is too unrealistic. Mr. President, it will never, ever, ever happen. The Berlin Wall will stand for all eternity. You can't go say this. And Reagan, with a twinkle in his eye, he simply responded, you don't understand. This is the whole point of the speech. And Ronald Reagan went before the Brandenburg Gate, stood on a spot I stood just this summer with my family. And he said, Mr. Gorbachev, if you seek peace, tear down this wall. Within less than 3 years of uttering those words, the Berlin Wall was torn to the ground. And here's the critical point. It wasn't knocked down by American army tanks. It wasn't bombed into rubble by American missiles. Instead, it was torn down by the power of truth. It was torn down by the power of freedom. It was torn down by the eyes of the world focusing on the Soviet Union as an evil empire, on the demand to tear down this wall. The Soviet Union was much, much weaker than everyone believed at the time, and I'll tell you, the Ayatollah and the mullahs are much, much weaker than many believe at the time, and I thank you for standing up for freedom, because we will once again see a free Iraq. Thank you.